Welcome, book lovers and aspiring writers. Today, we have a special treat for you, an exclusive interview with a brilliant young author who will be taking the literary world by storm with her debut novel, Drafted. This captivating book will be releasing soon. What's astounding is the fact that the book's author is just 17 years old. Join us today as we delve into the mind and imagination of this literary prodigy, uncovering the inspiration behind Drafted. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please ask them in the comment section. Now, let's be amazed by the creative genius that lies ahead and welcome the extraordinary author behind Drafted, Tommie Rivituso.
Thank you.
Yay! So, tell us a little bit about this book, Drafted. A little bit about, I know it's not released yet, but just give us a little bit of insight on what the book is about.
So, Drafted is definitely it's centered on forgiveness and trust. Those are kind of the two main themes that I just really wanted to write about. It's a story about a vigilante in this kind of dystopian world. Um, the main kind of plot line is this girl, when she was 5 years old, her little sister got taken for this government program. It's super secret, like, not a lot of people know what it really is. And so she grows up and she learns archery and she becomes the archer, a vigilante kind of out to find her sister, avenge her sister. Um, she meets some people along the way. I'm trying not to spoil anything. And
There's
it's,
a lot of twists and turns.
yeah,
There's intrigue, there's romance, there's even murder and tranquilizer darts. There's suspense for sure and devious plots.
all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It mostly, the main kind of theme is this journey of forgiveness.
Mm.
So, my main character, she makes some mistakes early on in the novel, makes some choices that she later comes to regret. And so, over the whole novel, it's kind of this journey of forgiveness and trust.
Now, having read a little bit of the book, there are people whom she forgives, and then also other people who forgive her as well. So, what is the basis of why are you so fixated on this forgiveness theme?
For me, it comes back to the reason behind why I write. I write to explore biblical themes in a way that's not like preachy or cheesy. I know when I was younger, I used to have a really, really hard time finding young adult novels that were clean and that were not explicit, but that were also not preachy. There's just no in between. So my goal is to write that in between and to have biblical themes like forgiveness and trust, but to explore them in a way with like deep and developed characters and that's not preaching at you.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a nice niche to go into, not only appealing to the young adult reader, but also possibly the parents who find these types of novels interesting. So, what led you to want to write? I mean, 16, you started the book when you were 16. Most 16-year-olds are not thinking about writing a novel. What the heck were you thinking?
I actually, this all started over COVID for me, really. A friend of mine was writing a book and she asked me if I'd read it for her. And I read it and I thought to myself, this seems kind of fun. Like, I think I could do this too. And then I discovered Ted Dekker, who's a Christian author, wrote one of my favorite book series, the Circle series. It's like a biblical allegory. It's fantasy, it's an adult fantasy. I read that and then I found out Ted Dekker had a writing course and I took his writing course. And after taking his writing course and after thinking, I kind of want to write a novel myself, it was the summer right after COVID when I finished my first draft of Drafted.
No kidding. No kidding. So, what inspired these characters, the archer, and then her cohorts? What inspired you to write about that particular topic?
For me, this also comes down to my process. It's going to be different for every writer. For me, particularly, I start with a theme, in this case, forgiveness and trust, and I build everything around that. So I wanted my main character to take this journey of forgiveness, and that meant making a main character with a lot of flaws. So in this case, making a main character who has trouble trusting people, who is tough and cold and just has made mistakes, and having that kind of a character learn to trust and accept forgiveness, because that is just what I thought would be a really impactful journey to follow. And all of the other characters I kind of built around that to support the Archer's journey, Rev's journey of forgiveness.
So the main character's name is Rev, also known as the Archer. Now, I noticed a theme of archery, which reminds me of the Hunger Games. So any correlation between those two?
Actually, not the Hunger Games. I was watching the show Arrow at the time I started writing this, the CW show, and I don't know why I was just so intrigued by this idea of archery specifically, but I loved the show. I was watching it with my family, and I just wanted to bring archery into the story just because I thought it was intriguing. I don't have any experience with archery.
I was going to ask you if you have any experience doing archery yourself.
No, I have no experience whatsoever
So you
with
had to
archery.
do some research.
A lot of research. My publisher and the writing coach I worked with actually both do bow hunting. So they were able to give me a lot of insight about like what is and isn't possible with different kinds of bows and all the technical details.
So speaking of publishers and going down that road, some authors will self-publish, will want to self-publish, but how did you end up with a publisher? That's not an easy feat for someone who's never written a book, never published, and to have an author pick up your book. How did that happen?
This is actually a very crazy story of just God opening door after door after door. When I first finished my novel, I was planning on self-publishing because I'd done the research and I was like, most people on their first novel, especially if they're young, aren't going to have a publishing deal or a contract offer from a big publishing company. And so I thought, okay, I'll just self-publish. But then the editor that I worked with was a family friend from our church, and she, after editing my novel, really liked it. And so she told me about this guy that she used to edit for, who had just started a publishing company. And she was like, hey, I know this guy. He just started a publishing company. I think he'd really like your book. It's a small Christian publishing company. He's looking to expand it. You should submit to him and see what he says. And I did. And then I got offered a contract.
That's absolutely amazing. It sounds like forgiveness, flaws, and then that Christian theme resonates with you. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so my mission in writing is I write for Christ. So my writing is just deeply rooted in my relationship with Christ. That is where my creativity comes from. I believe creativity is just a gift from God. So in my writing, I like to explore those biblical themes. I like to, how kind of Ted Decker put it in his writing courses, like take people on a journey through darkness to the light. So taking people through characters who are deeply flawed, characters that we can really relate to on that level of being flawed, on this journey of discovering truth. So forgiveness, discovering light, peace, joy, like those kinds of things. That's what I like to explore in writing. Like I like to glorify God through my writing in that way.
So having read this book, this is, and I'm going to give a little bit of a spoiler, this is not going to be the only book in this now series. It's going to be at least one more book, possibly, or
at least one more book. Hopefully just one more book, but we'll see.
That's what you're thinking.
That's how it's planned for
How
just
exciting.
one more book.
How exciting. Now, your peers, obviously, I don't know many 16-year-old, 17-year-old writing a book and publishing it. You know, usually older folks are doing that. What do your peers think about your writing a book?
Reactions, they vary based on definitely who I'm talking to. A lot of people who read a lot get super excited and they're telling me like, wow, this is super cool. I can't wait to read it. And then there's a lot of people who aren't as involved in reading or writing, and it's always just priceless kind of to see like the stunned like reaction, like the, whoa, like you're actually publishing a book. Like you didn't just write a book, you're publishing it. Reactions definitely vary for sure.
Now, writing a book is, you said you wrote a draft, but then now you send it to a publisher, and then now they're looking at your book. They're probably critiquing it, or maybe an editor, a copywriter is looking at your book. They're giving you feedback and sometimes criticism. How did that feel?
A huge part of writing, if you're doing it to publish, is learning how to take criticism. That is definitely something I had to learn throughout the multiple years I've been going back and forth with different people on this manuscript. From my very first editor to the writing coach I worked with a month ago with the publishing company, it's always feedback. There's always something you can improve on. The trick is learning how to not take it personally. Because normally, unless you're just working with a person who's not very nice, normally criticism is not a personal attack. But sometimes, because it's your work, because it's this thing you've worked so hard on, it can feel a little bit more personal than it truly is. So it's learning to take a step back, to look at it like a project, to look at it like a piece of work that you did that is receiving this criticism to help. And you have to learn how to take a step back and use criticism, whether it's good, whether it's bad, to improve whatever you've done.
Well, I think a lot of adults can take that advice, really, what you have just given, not take it to heart. And it's not really a criticism of you, it's just the work needs a little bit of improvement. That's about it. So how has this writing process, oh gosh, changed in your growth and development as a person, as such a young person?
Oh, wow. This is actually a great question. This is probably one of my favorite questions. With writing, writing is such a deeply personal thing for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other authors. It's a way of expressing emotion, of exploring themes, exploring darkness and light in a way that you can really take a journey. That's how I like to think of it. That's how I learned writing, was as a journey. And there's just something really special about telling stories. Stories are what move people. Stories are the way straight to someone's heart. Stories can just take you somewhere else. But the journey aspect of it, I think, has been the biggest for me. It's really a journey of discovery. So whatever themes I'm writing about, that's what I'm writing to discover. So in this case, Drafted, I was discovering so much about forgiveness and just experiencing it in a new way.
And, you know, we watch movies. You have books that are written, but then those books are then picked up by writers and movie producers, and then they get translated into a movie. I always think the book that's written as interpreted by me in my mind are much better than how it's portrayed in movie, because that movie is being painted using through somebody else's lens. But then a book that I read, I'm creating all the colors and I'm creating the scenery in my mind, which is a lot more vivid and it's a lot more, I think, creative than something that is just here. This is it. This is the movie. This is the way it's shot. This is the perspective that you get. So I think telling stories, writing stories, and then reading those stories, I think is a lot more interesting to me than just reading, just watching a movie. Even though I do enjoy watching movies a lot.
Yeah. With writing, I'm forgetting what it's called at the moment, but a big thing is leaving room for the reader's interpretation. So not over describing, not forcing everything on the reader, like letting the reader make the story and take the journey themselves. You do have to leave room for that. It's a huge part.
Yeah, that is probably a fine line between explicitly this is what's going on versus just kind of describing what's going on without filling the color, the shade, the smell, all the details, so that there's no room for imagination.
It's definitely a fine line. That's what rewrites and edits and having other people read your manuscript, it really helps with that.
So what are your long-term goals? Longer-term goals, I mean, this is just the first book, right? Even though it's a lot of work. What are your long-term goals as a writer?
Long-term goals, I just want to write more books, obviously. Keep publishing, write more, learn more, get better. I would love to ultimately, probably once I get older, since I'm still in school right now, I'd love to travel and talk to kids or younger writers, like speak at high schools or speak at schools, and talk to people who are like me, who would like to hear from a younger writer or from someone who wrote a book in high school and hear advice and stuff about how to balance all of that. I would just really love to eventually be able to talk to people about writing. I think that would be really cool.
Well, speaking of balancing, how do you balance writing and high school?
It's hard, and that's something I'm definitely still learning. I prioritize school. I think having your priorities straight is the biggest thing. Knowing exactly where your priorities are, because if you don't, then you're not going to know how to kind of split your time up.
Mm-hmm.
For me, my relationship with Jesus comes first, and then school, and then writing. And so I dedicate time accordingly.
Boy, it's hard to find someone who has her priorities so straight. So, to what do you attribute this quality of having your priorities so correctly aligned?
It's really something my parents have taught me. When I first started writing, it was COVID, and so I didn't really have to worry about prioritizing time because I had way too much of it on my hands. And by the time school started again, I was already writing. So as I kind of got into my sophomore and junior year of high school, it was learning how to keep my grades up, how to focus on school first and writing second, but still be able to do both. This year, it has been learning that I can't just do everything all at once. There are some things I'm going to have to sacrifice if I want to commit more time to writing and publishing and all of that. But it really just is about prioritizing. And I think my parents have definitely taught me that.
Yeah, it's amazing how having a two-parent family can really foster that necessary upbringing and education, and you are certainly exemplary. Before we go on, I want to just read a comment that here says, "Wow, she is just amazing." Thank you, Dina, for the comment. And as usual, those of you who are watching, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. And if you're watching this on the replay, certainly I will pass the questions along to Tommie so that you get your questions answered. So drafted, you wrote it, it's been picked up by a publisher. When does the public get to read this book?
I don't think I'm supposed to say the exact date yet. I do have one in mind, but I don't think we're at that kind of big reveal yet. I do know it will be mid-October. It'll be available on Amazon. If you're in Arizona, it'll probably be available locally, Barnes and Nobles. We'll see how that goes. I'll be doing book signings and stuff around Arizona. But if you're not local or you just don't want to go to Barnes and Noble, it will be available on Amazon.
Well, I will be one of those picking up one of the first copies and have it signed by you, and I'll probably cover your book signing, and I'll probably photograph it, and with your permission, of course. Very good. One last question. For the aspiring young adult writer, novel writer, what advice do you have for that writer, that author?
My main piece of advice for any writer, regardless of your age, but especially just starting out, would be to know your why. This is something I learned through the Ted Dekker writing class that I took really early on. But not before you start writing, but early on in your writing career, you need to know why you write. So for me, it would be to take people on a journey through darkness to see the light, to write about biblical themes, to write clean fiction for young adult readers like me who have a hard time finding that middle ground between like preachy and like explicit. So that was my goal writing out. That's why I write. For everyone, it's going to be slightly different, but having that purpose in why you write, that determines what you write, that determines how you write, that determines who you talk to. It just determines everything about your authoring career. So that would probably be my main piece of advice, would be figure it out early on.
Certainly very inspirational, and I hope this will allow other authors to kind of see what you've done and know that it is possible to do this while you're in high school, and possibly if they have a passion for writing and if they have a strong why, I'm sure hopefully someone will take action and follow you in your footsteps. Melissa says, so amazing. She's so well spoken. Such great advice for young readers. That is so awesome. Thank you so much for your comments. Well, I'm going to bring this to an end. I can't wait to see any future projects that you may have and what you will put out as your sequel to Drafted. And I can't wait for the public to be able to read this book. It's going to be amazing, and it's going to be clean. It is clean. It is intriguing, and lots of twists and turns and plot changes. So it's going to be worth your while to pick up the book and read it. Thank you so much for the privilege of your time. Please take care of yourself and take care of each other. Bye-bye.